Hello, and welcome to the webinar series. I'm Nicole, your host for today. Today's session is titled Research Integrity and Publishing Ethics, presented by Elizabeth Moylan. Elizabeth is the publisher, Research Integrity and Publishing Ethics at Wiley, where she drives projects in open research and related policy. She also works closely with colleagues in Wiley's Integrity and Publishing Group, providing support on research integrity and publishing ethics issues. She is an editorial board member for Research Integrity and Peer Review, and is an advisory board member for two EU-funded projects, Entire and Virtue, that aim to support researchers in upholding and practicing the principles of research integrity. Elizabeth completed her PhD and postdoctoral training at the University of Oxford, UK. Today's webinar is expected to last about an hour and will be recorded. The recording will be made available after the session has ended, and a link will be emailed to you. As always, we welcome questions from the audience. Please feel free to send through your questions anytime via the Ask a Question button located underneath the main video player, and stay with us to the end of the presentation, where we'll answer the questions in the Q&A session. Over to Elizabeth now for you to begin your presentation.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Hello, everybody. I thought we'd spend the next 30 to 40 minutes reflecting on a few things in research integrity, and I'm trying to pitch this quite generally for the audience that have arrived today, and there will be opportunities to ask questions at the end. As Nicole said, she talked through a little bit about what I do at Wiley and my role. So just for the sake of declaring conflicts of interest, I just wanted to share a little bit about me. I work closely with Chris Graff, who's the Director for Research Integrity and Publishing Ethics at Wiley, and also with members of our Integrity and Publishing Group, which comprise individuals from across various departments in Wiley who help and support colleagues when they come up with research integrity issues at their journals. Prior to being at Wiley, I was at Biomed Central for a number of years, and I've also been a COPE Council member and involved with some of the more education materials COPE put out. And just for interest, I was a researcher before taking the leap into publishing, and my background's in plant biology. So that's a little bit about me. I thought it would be interesting to see a little bit about you and the people who've joined today. So I was just going to ask a question in the poll about your role and your background. So I'm just going to launch this poll to you and hope you can see it. Here we go, clicking buttons. I hope you can see that, and I'll just give you a few seconds to decide, what's the role that best fits you. So I think that should be enough time. I'm just going to gather those results, and then I hope I can share this back to you so that you can see as well. So it looks to me that many of you joining today are active researchers. That's lovely. Some have an institutional role as well. There's some librarians on the line, that's great. Publishers as well, fantastic. So we've got a nice spread, but mainly researchers, so that's great to see. And I'm just going to move my slide on to also ask another question. Hope you can see this. In thinking about, research integrity and what has the most potential for improving research integrity. I've just put a number of options here on the slide because people talk about all these things and the impact they can make on research integrity. So I just want to move to my next poll. So I'm going to share that with you and hope you can answer the questions. So yeah, I'll just give you a few seconds to reflect on this and which of these would be your top choice for having the most impact on improving research integrity. So hopefully that's enough time to answer the question, and I'm just going to share those results back. It looks like we've got a nice mix. So here you go. Hope you can see that. So there's a nice even spread, and it looks to me that ongoing training and a supportive research culture really are coming up tops as having the most potential for improving research integrity. There is a role for editorial checks at journal level and collaboration, but perhaps less of a role for regulation of research integrity, and I think that does tend to come out from these conversations. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. Fab. So lovely. So in order for us to see where we're going today, this is an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So what do we mean by research integrity? What issues can arise in research integrity, and on the flip side, the sorts of issues that we see and the Integrity in Publishing Group see at Wiley in research publishing. I just want to touch on a few example cases to bring that alive for you. And then maybe we can reflect on how we can shape the future of research integrity and those kind of, it's really interesting to see your viewpoints there in that poll, the things that you think will have most impact. So there are many definitions of research integrity, but I like this one from the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity. We know that, the primary goal of research is really to advance knowledge, and to do that, it has to be trustworthy. So I like the fact that this statement really calls out honesty in all aspects of research, accountability in the conduct of research, professional courtesy and fairness in working with others, and, good record keeping and good stewardship of research on behalf of others. So I thought that was a nice place to start. But we all know that while research is absolutely fundamental to advancing knowledge, nevertheless issues can arise in research integrity. And I feel I often go back to this slide taken from a publication 10 years ago now, because it really captures the spectrum of issues that can arise. If we go across the slide from left to right, they go from sort of honest error, mistakes, poor record keeping, that sort of thing, to moving across into more questionable research practices and misconduct, to outright fraud. So, things like making up your results, fabrication, changing certain, findings, falsifying things, plagiarism, all those kind of things. And the spectrum also runs sort of down the page as well, where some of these things, people have done them unintentionally, and some are very much with intent, and some are really easy to detect, like, if people haven't got informed consent for the research they're doing. And some things are really tricky to detect. So it really captures what issues can arise in research integrity when doing research. If we view that from the other lens of publication integrity, if you like. What are the issues that journals can see? I just wanted to flag COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, which I mentioned earlier. So COPE has a role to provide support for publishers and editors. And one of the fantastic things that COPE offers is the ability, when publishers may hit a particular thorny issue that they need advice on, they can take that case to COPE. So it could be, it could be plagiarism, for example. It could be a particularly tricky authorship issue. And COPE will, we anonymise the case, of course, and we say this is a difficulty we face. We discuss it at COPE Forum, which is held every quarter. And then the advice at the time is given, and the case is documented in the COPE cases database according to this classification of 18 different terms, which I'm showing on the screen now. So that's a fantastic resource of over 600 cases currently at COPE. And of all those 18 categories, I've just highlighted in bold the ones that, the Integrity and Publishing Group at Wiley see most commonly. So we see a lot of authorship issues coming up. We see a lot of need to correct the literature, either with corrections or retractions or expressions of concern. We see data issues coming up, questionable behaviour, and plagiarism. So I think that captures our big 5 issues that we see at Wiley. And I just wanted to mention that increasingly these issues are becoming more complex, and it is recognised that sometimes these systematic manipulations of the publishing process occur at scale in terms of authorship manipulation and authors being added to papers that they shouldn't really be added to. Peer review manipulation and attempts to manipulate that process, and image manipulation as well. So these are on the rise, and it's great to see COPE partnering with Spring and Nature here and issuing some guidance on how to tackle some of these issues. So that was quite recent in 2018. So that's a little whiz through of the sorts of things that might arise in research integrity and overall the sorts of things we see. But I'd like to illustrate this now with a couple of example cases to bring this alive for you. So this might be a typical case that could arise on a journal. So if we think about what constitutes authorship, here we've got an example where a peer reviewer has agreed to review a manuscript, but after accepting to review, they contact the journal and they demand authorship because they've actually provided materials for the research. Should they be an author? So in thinking about that, the sorts of considerations we could think about were, what do we mean by authorship? what do you have to do to be an author? And I do realise that this differs across disciplines, of course, and we often reflect on the ICMJE criteria, which give 4 criteria for authorship. That authors should make a substantial contribution to the research, be involved in drafting the work and editing the manuscript and finalising and approving the work, and agree to be accountable for all aspects. But the key things coming out are substantial contribution and accountability. And it felt that in this situation, if somebody has provided maybe a reagent or an antibody or a sample or something like that, is acknowledgement, perhaps rather than authorship, more appropriate in this case? And other things to reflect on, as you handle these cases, perhaps the reviewer, before agreeing to review, maybe should have declared they had some conflict of interest in this case. So that's just a fairly straightforward example of some issues we may routinely see. Authorship issues can be more complex, however, and if they're not easily resolved with guidance from the journal, then all we can do is refer this situation back to the authors and often loop in the institution, and the manuscript's on hold until that situation is resolved. I'm just going to move on to the next case, which is thinking about plagiarism. So perhaps another typical situation that could arise is a journal publishes an article and then a reader gets in touch and says, it seems that there's plagiarism in this published article and, it should be retracted. What should the journal do? So that's another kind of case that we would see quite typically. And some of the things that we reflect on when handling these issues are, where in the text do similarities occur? It may be that if there are some similarities in the introduction or the methods, that's possibly okay because, researchers are setting the scene for what's been gone before and using maybe similar methods. If there's lots of similarities in results and conclusions, that will be more concerning, that, is the research really original? Other things that we look at are whether we see, evidence of direct copying and sort of theft of ideas or text, or is this a case of a prior published article being used as inspiration, if you like, for, the layout and writing of a piece of work? Is the data authentic? Are the results new? Is plagiarism occurring from multiple sources or one main source? These are the kind of things that we weigh up when handling or reacting to this kind of issue. But it may be that if the results are new, the data are authentic, perhaps the overlap occurred in maybe the scene setting and the introduction, it might be that a correction in this case is more appropriate, citing the previous publication. If not, and it doesn't look like the results are new, and it does look like it's been plagiarized from a previously published article, then retraction could be more appropriate. So we as publishers have a duty of care to the integrity of the literature. So these are the sorts of things that we would weigh up in how to proceed in this case. I'll move on now to illustrate one more example. Another sort of example case that may come up is a potential allegation about data fabrication. So peer reviewer agrees to review a manuscript and then suspects data manipulation. What could the editor do? So some considerations could be, okay, look at the allegation, consider it. Perhaps we can reach out to the author and say, have you got your original data files on this? Can you share with us what's going on? We might want to also reach out to the institution to investigate. If there's a satisfactory explanation, because sometimes, mistakes happen, files are mixed up, the wrong image was put in, fine, okay, peer review can proceed. But if the explanation is unsatisfactory and it does indeed look like data fabrication has occurred, then the manuscript will be rejected, and we will really flag this to the institution to help guide the researcher. So there are a few examples of the sorts of issues we see to give you a flavour from a publisher point of view. I just want to pause and reflect on, how can we encourage integrity in research and publication? What are some of the things that we can do? And picking up on that poll at the beginning when I posed the question. So it goes without saying that we all have a role to play in research integrity. No one stakeholder can do this alone, and upholding the values of integrity is a shared responsibility for researchers, for institutions, for funders, and for publishers. So, we recognise that we're all in this together. There's a real need to foster best practice via local networks. I think while you can look at what's going on at an international scale, it's the local community effects that are really powerful. So I just wanted to illustrate that with the Asia Pacific Research Integrity Network, and how community-driven approaches can be really powerful. Publishers have a duty of care to the research they publish and the integrity of the research they publish. So it's really important that we have clear policies and processes and ways to implement them. And we've been reflecting at the Integrity in Publishing group recently on some of the cases we've handled, and how things can be improved. And so just this year we've collaborated on revising Wiley's best practice guidelines for research integrity and publishing ethics. So this is very much from the perspective of giving support to editors, but it also can help researchers too. So I just wanted to flag that work. It feels to me that support via training is still really, really fundamental, and this is not sort of isolated training and then you're done. It feels like integrated training, training that goes on and really captures those sort of learning moments, when researchers are first writing their papers and reflecting on what authorship is, how they can get their data and records together, and that sort of thing. So I wanted to flag a publication by Mark Hooper and colleagues at Queensland University of Technology, where they were reflecting on how they can give support via training for research integrity and the courses that they can offer. And they've made them really fun and relevant, and they're also available CC BY. So if there are other people who want to look at these resources and adapt them for their own use at their institutions, they're free to do that as well. Another thing that has the real potential for driving change, I think, are the use of open research practices, which are a set of practices to improve the accessibility, the reproducibility and integrity of research outputs. So, of course, in that sort of illustrative case of data fabrication, if data are shared with a publication, they're put in the repository, other people can find the data, access it. That really does speak volumes to making, pushing integrity in the right direction. So I'm just flagging open data on this slide of practices. The other thing I want to flag is things like initiatives like, sharing early versions of your research on a preprint server, the registered report initiative, where you, if you're saying in a piece of research, this is what I want to do, this is how I go about it, you can submit that to a journal as a registered report with no data, no results and conclusions, and have peer review on that study protocol and proposal. And if all looks well, the researcher has the great benefit of an accepting principle at the journal before they've even done the research. And that really speaks to, transparency in research, accountability for research, and, getting away from the notion of publication bias, where, no matter what the findings, the journal is committed to publish. So I just wanted to give a flag to registered reports. There are ways to open up peer review as well, and Wiley's definitely exploring those with our transparent peer review initiative, where we publish reports alongside a published article, and give recognition for the work people do. So I hope many of you have an ORCID ID, which links, which is free for you to register and get an ORCID, which gives a unique identifier to you and links you to your research. And another thing you may have heard of, which is helpful in authorship, is the credit taxonomy, the contribution roles taxonomy, credit, which is a 14-item classification of the different roles authors can play. And I really like it because I think it gives you, as researchers, the ability, before a piece of research is started, to really have those conversations about authorship and who's doing what and who's playing what role, and making it really clear what people have done. So I share a link to a blog that a colleague wrote on this topic, but also the Centre for Open Science has a lot of information on open research initiatives if you want to find out more. I think there's a real role to encourage, recognise and reward best practice in terms of open research, and Wiley has an Open Science Ambassador programme where annually they really reflect on the people who've been, making great strides in these areas. So I think that's really, encouraging this behaviour is really great. And one thing that came out of the World Conference on Research Integrity last year was the set of which was taking place in Hong Kong, was the Hong Kong Principles for Assessing Researchers. So if we're to really, I think this came out at the poll at the beginning, there's a real need to support and foster a culture of research integrity that's really positive. So assess researchers on the responsible practices for research, rather than, the journal that they publish that research in. Value accurate and transparent reporting research. Value practices like open research, sharing data, and other initiatives such as replication and meta-research, and the other contributions people make in research through peer review and mentoring. So there's a whole spectrum there that people can be recognised for what they do. So to tie this together, when at Wiley, in terms of research integrity and what we can do, we really try and drive change in positive directions. And sometimes that's by taking baby steps, but we really feel that the 3 T's of using the right tools, training and thought leadership can help in these cases. So this just draws together a little bit of what I was talking about, touching on the various policies and open research initiatives that people can embrace. For us as publishers, we recognise that tools and technology play a role in research integrity. Whilst we try and take a proactive approach, we realise that sometimes we have to react and be in a situation and learn from it, and then revise, policies and processes because of that. And then we always try, through events like this, to raise awareness of research integrity, to write about what we learn, to share guidelines. So I think that's really key as well. So I think that's about enough from me on research integrity, and I really want to, thank the Integrity in Publishing group, because they're a great group of people to work with, and also Nicole and colleagues at Wiley for hosting today. And I do believe the slides will be shared after, so there's some further resources as well. But maybe we want to have a look and see if there's any questions that have come up, Nicole.
Hey Elizabeth, that was a great presentation. Thank you for all the information that you shared there. I think that we actually have quite a number of questions. Let's see how we can work through this. I put aside a few, so I'll just read them out to you and see whether you want to answer them now. So somebody has asked, how do we determine who should be included as authors in a research article? And his second question is, how far is permission still required after we have cited an idea or evidence from an article?
Maybe we should do the first one, which is about authorship. Is that right?
Yes. Who should be included as an author?
So I think it comes down to a little bit about what I was saying at the beginning. It's about responsible authorship. So it's having those conversations early. So if you have a piece of work that's that has to be done, and you're sitting down with your supervisor and discussing how you're going to go about it, I think it's really important to discuss early and agree who should be included, who's doing what aspect of the research. Are certain people going to bring in certain skills such as statistical analysis and that sort of thing? Could they be in that? And keep a record of your agreement and who made what contribution, and trying to discuss it and agree it in writing. And then if things change because you need to bring more people in, revisit. But I would recommend reading a little bit about the credit taxonomy for authorship, because that puts those roles into 14 standard terms and will enable you, if you're finding it, I'm quite British and I find it quite awkward to have these conversations, but you can then say, hey, this is the credit taxonomy for authorship. Let's have an open discussion about this in respect to of work we're undertaking now, and agree, who's going to be an author on the paper, and who we might say, well, because of a slightly different role, that maybe they've provided a reagent or something like that, who could be acknowledged. I hope that helps a bit.
Okay, I think those are very good tips, especially when getting it in writing. So, yeah. He had a second question. So it was, how far is permission still required after we have cited an idea or evidence from an article?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
So the question is, how far would permission still be required after the author has cited an idea or evidence from another article?
I'm not sure whether that's in relation to plagiarism, but it's about being transparent. So if another piece of work inspired you, then you absolutely should cite it and refer to, Moylan et al. Did this, and how you've built on that piece of work, and so be really transparent what you're citing and why. Sorry, does that help?
Yeah, I think that's pretty helpful. I think that helps. Okay, so we have another question that was referring to one of your earlier slides. Based on the previous slide about issues in integrity, what does bullying refer to? Are there types of bullying in, say, research and authorship?
Yeah. I think so. I think it's a really interesting one. I think it's trying to capture the range of issues that can arise, and I think we have to recognise that there are certain situations where maybe because of competition in labs and that sort of thing, I have heard people say, well, I'd rather not discuss authorship, for example, because I like to keep competition high in the lab for places on a paper. And, in some regard, that's really questionable, because it's almost, anti the supportive culture we're trying to achieve here. And it's a little bit like bullying, who's going to do the most work, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what it refers to. And we don't want a culture like that at all, do we? We want a culture where we do talk frankly about research and, agree who's playing what role. And there shouldn't be any sort of bullying into, jostling for positions on papers.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay. And then there were a couple of questions. I think it was referring to an earlier slide about authorship. So they were asking about what is the full meaning of COI.
Oh, yes, a DOI, yeah. So that's a digital object identifier. So it gives the piece of work a unique DOI. I think that's right, digital object identifier, so you can cite that piece of work. And so, if you were to preprint your work, that preprint would have a unique DOI. You could then submit the work to a journal for peer review, and if published, that piece of work would have a DOI. So it enables us to cite pieces of work. And the fascinating thing about transparent peer review, just to go as an aside from that, is that if we have transparent peer review and we publish reviewer comments alongside articles, we can also give those DOIs as well. And so, you can cite a review report that inspired you to go down a particular avenue of research, not only the research article itself. So, yeah, hope that helps.
Yes, that does. There's an interesting one here. Let me read it out to you and let's hear your thoughts. So someone asked, how do we put aside differences in your research article while maintaining your integrity?
How do you put aside differences in your research article while maintaining integrity? I don't know. Is that unpredictable differences in what was found, or I think I don't know what the question's driving at. Is there a little bit more detail?
No, I think that was the only question. Or maybe the person who put in the question can perhaps key in his question again and detail what kind of differences he's referring to.
Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah.
We'll revisit. Sorry.
No problem. Another question is asking, from a reviewer point of view, how would we know or how do we check data fabrication in a journal?
Okay, that's a great question. I think these things can be hard to spot, and not to say if a reviewer didn't spot it, they would be a bad reviewer, not at all. But if it's the kind of thing where maybe things are too good to be true. I think in cases I can recall where reviewers have flagged things, maybe blots have looked too clean, or they've been very Western blots. So there's been clear splice lines around bands that have been shown, things like that might catch a reviewer's eye because they're also an expert in the field and they know how that research is done. So sometimes we see this is too clean, this can't be real, and we might need to ask for the original data there. Or that's odd, the band or something that's shown in figure 1 is very similar to figure 3. How can that be when they're meant to be different sample sizes or something like that? And so things like that might catch a reviewer's eye, perhaps more so than my eye, because they're, the expert in the field.
I see. Okay. Oh, that's a good point to take note of. Okay. There's another question about plagiarism. So it asks, in a research article, would auto citation or self-citation be categorized as plagiarism, and how many citations would constitute as plagiarism?
One of my colleagues at the Integrity and Publishing Group, Lindsay Matthews, wrote a really helpful blog, and maybe we can share the links afterwards, where she took a deep dive into, plagiarism and understanding that. And self-plagiarism is a bit of a strange term, isn't it? Because how can you, plagiarize yourself? But but what we're probably all, guilty of doing from time to time is recycling our words and text from previous publications. And I think the thing to do is to be really transparent about it. So to say, as I described when I last, was doing my research on this on my last paper, put the citation in, so, Moylan 2018, I blah, 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 blah. And, you can, at least it's clear that I'm trying to say, this is what I did before, and I'm referencing it. Some people, if they want to say, you do the methods like this, because the thing about methods is we don't want to have to rewrite them in totally different ways, because it's a method, right? We want to do it. So particularly with methods, we'd say I followed the method described by Matthews 2017 here. You could even put it in quotes or something like that. So just be really transparent about what you're doing, and cite the original source, rather than lifting the text from the original source and not citing it. So there's a difference there.
Okay. All right, that's good tip. And another question about plagiarism, I think it's a little bit related to the earlier one. So is there an acceptance percentage for plagiarism? And where is the best place for me to check plagiarism, or is there a resource where I can check plagiarism?
Yeah. This is a tricky one, because it people try and apply these rules, but this is why plagiarism is quite tricky, because it's not all about, there's 50% plagiarism, say, in an article. You might think, wow, if that all came from one source and was lifted from one source, that could be, quite bad. Whereas if that plagiarism came from a little phrase here or there, mainly to do with the introduction or the methods, that might be acceptable. So people talk about, percentage levels of plagiarism, but it's about actually interpreting the report. So, if something was, it's below 30% plagiarism, that looks good, but in actual fact you find that that's the results and conclusions, that's terrible. So you have to, it's not just about a cut-off value, it's about where the plagiarism occurs and in what form it's in. But I think anything more than 30%, plagiarism might be a flag to an editor to take a closer look.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point to take note. There's quite a number of questions. Hang on, let me find something that's interesting. So somebody is asking, I'm not sure whether you can give some tips to him on. He's asking would he be able to write a sophisticated introduction to research manuscripts?
How to write an introduction?
Sophisticated introduction.
So, in framing the introduction to a manuscript, it's really important to have done a literature search to know, what's gone on before and what's current, and what's the topic in the field at the moment. So it might also be helpful to look at a review article and that sort of thing, and then frame the introduction in reference to what people have done so far and where the field is at, but the particular question that you're asking in this paper is, and then ask that. I don't know if that helps at all, or if I missed the point, sorry.
No, that's not a problem. I have an interesting question here. Maybe you can give your points on it. So somebody is asking that with the rising pressure and the need to publish, especially with focus in-depth publications in Asia, do you see a kind of trend of integrity issues? And yes, which side does it occur more on, of the researcher or publisher or author? And for institutions, what kind of integrity violations should they be looking out for?
Okay, that's a great question. So in my earlier slides, I was trying to categorize the particular cases we see at Wiley from the COPE cases taxonomy, and where we are seeing most issues are in things like authorship, plagiarism, issues with the data. And I think where it's really helpful, and this is where we all have a role to play in research integrity, is if those conversations happened earlier, with the institution, and people receive guidance on how to go about having authorship discussions, how not to plagiarize previous work. That would be really helpful, because publishers wouldn't see those issues downstream, and they'd be sorted earlier. So I think to have training and support on being open about who's an author on the paper and what role they're playing saves authorship disputes later down the line, where it's really hard for a journal to do anything. So there's some of the sort of trends that we're seeing. And I think, unfortunately, as there is such pressure to publish that's been put on people, we do see situations where, authors may be added to a paper at later stages that looks a bit suspicious, So that publishers are becoming more aware of, and I would refer you to the COPE guidelines on systematic manipulations of the publication process, because that gives an overview of some of these issues.
Okay, and that link is actually available in your list of resources.
Yeah, and you'll circulate the slide afterwards. Yeah.
All right. So there's a question here about copyright and intellectual property. So what are your insights about copyright and intellectual property in times of open online access to information and online learning modality?
I think again, it's been really clear who has intellectual property and say control of the data and that sort of thing, because we have seen instances where authors may have felt that they had the intellectual property and they could go and write an article after they'd left an institution, but the institution felt that they had the ownership of the data. And so we have seen cases where that has resulted in trickiness. So I think you have to work with your institution on that and be really clear about that.
Okay, all right. I have another question here that might appeal to you as a former researcher. So this person asks, some people are afraid that making their research available online make them susceptible to plagiarism. Would you say that the benefits of making research available to others would outweigh the risks of papers being plagiarized?
Yeah, I would, because I think wherever you publish your work, I guess you run that risk anyway, don't you? But and if it occurs, you can call it out and always flag it to a journal if that's occurred to you and say, my work's been plagiarized, I'm writing to you to address it, and that's the publication you've just published online that's plagiarized my work. And so we as a publisher would have a duty of care to remedy that, either via a correction or a retraction. But I think I think your work out there or on a preprint server, you can still say you're laying claim to that work as yours, and it's time stamped as yours. So that's the benefit of it.
Okay. All right. And something, we do have a few more questions, but I think that we can end on this. It's quite a positive one, so I think it will appeal to you because you've worked on both sides. So how do we inculcate the research culture for our younger generation?
So how do we foster a research culture for the younger generation?
Yeah.
So I think the role of having, a research integrity officer at an institution is really key. I think particularly when people are inducted into research, having those training and support programs on how to go about, writing a piece of work in the right way, how to go about discussing authorship, how to go about, keeping careful data records, that sort of thing. I think it's really great as people are in, maybe at the PhD level, they're starting out, that should be part of the PhD program. But it's got to be ongoing as well, because sometimes, we also hear from early career researchers that, they embrace these practices, but they find that perhaps the more senior generation and the PIs don't, and they find it harder to have those conversations with them. So I think it's not only about the early career researchers, but about everybody and the role that they can. And it doesn't feel it's a kind of one hit and you're done. It feels like there are these, ongoing opportunities to foster training and support. So I shared the link to the Queensland University of Technology article that they wrote on their experiences, research integrity training, and how they went about it. So that's a really helpful document. And certainly more is being done on work to look at research culture and how we can, make it more positive. So I think there's more coming out on that as well.
Okay, that's great. That's really great to hear, especially for the people who are going into research. Okay, I think that we've made really good time on this webinar, so why don't we just end on that question on self-positive modes. And thank you, Elizabeth, for taking the time to share your experiences with us, and to the audience who have joined us today. We'll be sending out a recording link to everybody after this session, so don't worry if you've missed it or there were some technical issues, you'll be able to listen to this again, and you can take a look at the slides in the webinar recording, so you'll be able to see the resource links as well. So thank you again to everybody. Have a good day ahead, and we will see you at our next webinar. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, everybody.